Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Automation Hour episode. Having some technical difficulties, so please bear with me just a second. All right. With any luck, we've got it in screen sharing mode, and we're going to get started. Unfortunately, today's presenter was not able to join us last minute due to some unforeseen circumstances. So I'm going to pinch hit today. We'll see how well this goes. All right, so some logistics. As most of you are aware by now, we are going to have all lines muted. But we do encourage interaction. So please post your questions, comments, either in the Automation Hour Trailblazer community group, or of course you can use the chat or question widget here in GoToWebinar. And of course, we invite you to interact with us on your favorite social media platform or wherever you can find us. So of course, we're on the Trailblazer community. Our website has all of our past and upcoming events. And of course, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and have our YouTube channel where all of those recordings will be posted. So it's been a great year so far. Automation Hour has gone boot camp, and so we are continuing that trend. Here's where we are for the first half of the year, and we're down into building screen flows part 2, slightly rescheduled. But we also have the rest of the year planned out to continue on our flow learning journey together. So we encourage you to head to our website, sign up for as many or as few of these as makes sense. And of course, we cannot bring you these free of charge without the generous support of our sponsors. So of course, we like to take just a moment and say thank you to them. So Concrete.io has been around with us since the beginning. Huge shout out to them for their continued support. And we've also added Sumo Scheduler as a recent sponsor. That would be the word. Oh, hey, I'm getting a notice that we are not actually slide sharing. So let's see here. Thanks, Lena. If someone wants to confirm that you can now see a Sumo Scheduler slide, that would be really awesome. Perfect. Thanks. Appreciate it. Apparently, technical difficulties and I are going to be friends today. So yes, a big thank you to Concrete.io. Of course, also thank you to Sumo Scheduler and to Active Campaign, without whom we couldn't bring you those wonderful emails that remind you to sign up for our webinars every couple weeks. All right, so co-hosts today, you've got me, who's also going to be running the webinar, as well as Rakesh Gupta. So here's a little bit about me in case you're interested. I always encourage you all to reach out and get in touch if you've got questions or ever want to talk through anything flow or automation related. So awesome. So with that, we're going to live dangerously today, and I'm going to do a whole bunch of just live demos. And like I said, we'll see how this goes, pinch hitting. So we're talking about screen flows. So I'm going to hop into one of my dev orgs, and there's actually one that I have previously built that I'd love to take you through, just kind of see what we can do with those screen flows. And that is in a sandbox. A lot of times, if you've got a developer sandbox or a developer edition, there's little or no data in there. So how can we fix that problem? Well, we could always go in and hand key a bunch of records. And I don't know about you, but that sounds absolutely terrible to me. So instead, I thought, why not build myself a little flow that I could use to populate data into my org if I wanted. So you can see it here on our homepage, and it just says, welcome to your new sandbox. This flow is going to help you create data for use for development and testing. So if you're ready, click next to continue. So a couple things here. Number one, I've been able to embed this on the home screen, which is pretty cool. It's one of the great things about Flow with the Lightning platform is you can embed them directly into pages. No extra code is needed. So that's what we have done with this. You could also populate this anywhere else that you possibly wanted to within your org. So if you wanted to put this also on an account page for some reason, you absolutely could. Not sure that that would make the most sense for this one, but it's nice to know that you have those kinds of options. So I always like to demo and show you what it does, and then we can go back and look into it. So I'm going to go ahead and click next here. And this is going to be a pretty simple version. Didn't want to get it too complicated or crazy. So how many accounts do we want to create? The one thing you need to keep in mind, and we'll have an entire session about this later in the year, is there are limits to what you can do in Salesforce before you start to run into those dreaded timeouts, apex errors, governor limits, types of things. So I actually put in here just for my users, hey, let's try not creating maybe 1,000 accounts. Let's create 100 or less. But for today, I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and create 5. That seems like a pretty reasonable number for our testing. And so then it's really nice to create accounts, but that's probably not far enough down. So I can also create some opportunities. And so how many opportunities for each account do I want to create? Let's say 5 again. So with this, I'm going to be creating 30 records, 5 accounts, and then 5 times each of those 5 accounts, that's 25. So a total of 30 records, well below any limits that we've got. So this should run without any errors, but that's what we're going to use. So real quick, I'm going to open up the accounts tab just to kind of show you what's going on in this particular dev org right now. So if we look at our all accounts list, we've got some data thanks to Salesforce. We've got 13 whole accounts. We're probably used to seeing those names by now with all of our Trailhead work, but 13 accounts, and I'm going to add another 5 with my little flow here and another 5 opportunities. So let's go ahead and click next. It's going to do all the work. It did it real quick. The one thing I think I noticed is that I did not put a success screen on here. So maybe that's part of what we'll do today. But it ran and it actually refreshed the page and kicked me back to that first flow screen. So I'm going to hop over to my all accounts tab and I'm going to do a quick refresh here. And here we go. We have now 5 test accounts that have been added, courtesy of our automation. And if I were to click into one of those particular accounts, we can check and see if we have any opportunities. And it looks like maybe this part of my flow is broken. And so this is actually going to be an awesome way for us to dig into the flow and figure out perhaps why we don't have any opportunities that are related to that. So just for good measure, let's hop over to our opportunities tab and see what we've got going on. So yep, we only have 31. It looks like that part of the flow didn't work. I'm actually not totally surprised because I built this org as a training ground, and part of the class that I teach on this is how to fix flows that are not entirely correct. So there may be some stuff missing in here on purpose. So let's hop in. We're going to go grab our flow. So let's open it up and take a look under the hood. Okay, so you will probably notice if we're looking at this that I have this in freeform version. So this is really just a matter of preference with what you want, whether you want to use freeform or the auto layout. That is generally what Salesforce will start you with. One of the big differences on the canvas is that you're going to see this toolbox over here all the time on freeform, as opposed to if you're in the auto layout mode, you're going to have the little nodes where you're able to add those extra elements. And so it hides the toolbox for you unless you need it. So, all right, first things first, we have our screen that we launch from. And this is just basically what I like to put in for a placeholder screen, explaining to people what the flow is doing and making sure that they actually do want to go down this path before they click next and get into the meat of it. So, and one of the things I know we'll also probably talk about as we get into best practices is naming conventions. And so this is as good a time as any, in my opinion anyway, to start that conversation, and we can reinforce it throughout the year, as I know other presenters have as well. So everything in your flow is going to have to be named. And so I have some naming conventions that I tend to use. So for the actual screen component itself, I put a prefix SCRN for screen. And then everything on that screen also has to have an API name. So since this is a display text, DT is the prefix I put on there. And this is just the instructions. Essentially, this is what I'm teaching, or telling the users to do as we go through here. All right, so pretty solid for screen. Then we go to the next screen. Again, with my inputs here, I've labeled them as inputs. So I know when I'm looking at this from a builder's perspective that I'm expecting the user to put this number in. I'm not getting it from anywhere else. It's not being passed in possibly from a record or another process or anything. I am expecting input from the user. Again, we can make these required. And again, I put some default values in here to kind of help encourage my users to follow the limits that I have suggested. There's absolutely ways that you can do validation in screen flows. So if we come down here and there is this validate input. And so I will be completely honest, I hate using the validate input in flow because it's backwards of validation rules. And so my brain refuses to wrap around it. So a validation rule in Salesforce, you set up a formula that evaluates to true, and if it evaluates to true, the rule fires and prevents you from doing something. So if you don't want to let someone use a field or leave a field blank, then field is blank equals true, pops the rule. Now we need it to be backwards. So in this case, I'm fairly certain what we're going to need is if this is greater than 100, I want it to fire. So the valid input would be anything less than 100. So I can actually take this field up here. And so I'm going to insert the resource, and we can either scroll for it or type ahead to get to it. I'm just going to scroll down here until I get to my screen inputs, which I've walked right past here. There we go. So input number of accounts to create. I'm going to pull that in here, and I'm going to say that if this is less than 101, then we're okay. So if this evaluates to false, meaning it's 101 or greater, then we are going to give them an error message. Please enter a number 100 or less. Okay, so we can go ahead and we can add some validations to our screen flows like this. There's a couple other ways you could do it. You could do a decision after the screen and then basically pop the user over to an error message that says, hey, you put in a number I don't like, and then kick them back to the screen. A little more complicated to do it this way. This is probably the more elegant solution. Again, we're doing this on the fly, so we're going to see if this works. Because validation rules and I, not friends in flow. Okay, so now that we have the input from our user, we're going to go through and create those records. And so this is a really interesting flow concept because it's not a loop. So loops in flows, specifically when you use this loop element over here, are designed to go through a set of somethings, usually records, but a collection variable of some sort. So if we wanted to go through the colors of the rainbow, for example, we could and divide them into primary or secondary colors. So colors of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv. If I go through and I look at the first one, red, is that a primary color? Yep, it is. Orange. Nope, that's a secondary color. We'll split that out and do something different. But it's actually cycling through every element in our collection and then deciding what to do with it. Maybe we do the same thing to everyone. Maybe we do different things based on some criteria. But this essentially is building a loop without actually using a loop, just because we need to do something a fixed number of times. So in this case, we've been given a number for the accounts that we want to create, and we are going to have to go through and create as many accounts as that number is. In our case today, it's 5. So what I've done is I have created a variable. So I'm going to come over here, and I also name all of my variables with that same thing. So if we scroll down here to variables, you'll see they all start with VAR. And it's really nice for me to be able to just say, anytime I'm looking for something, especially in that list of resources, I'm looking for a variable, I know it starts with VAR, I can type ahead and squish that list down to just what is relevant. So my account counter variable, this is just going to hold the number of accounts that we have been asked to create. And so the default value is that input field. So the default value on this is going to be 5. I don't have to set that. It's already automatically set as the default value as soon as we pass this screen. And so then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do a decision. I'm going to say, hey, okay, I've got this account counter. What's that? What's the number? And as long as it's greater than 0, that means we have some accounts to create. I've got some work to do. So after we go through this, then what I'm going to do is, as long as it's not 0, we're going to follow this outcome arrow, and we're actually going to build our account. And so I created another variable. This time it's a record variable called new account. And just for ease of use right now, all I'm doing is hitting the required field of name. And so I've set that with a name. And then I've taken my account counter variable that's holding our number 5. and I'm going to subtract 1 from it to basically do a countdown and say, okay, we were asked to create 5 accounts. I've created 1. So now if I decrement that by 1, I have 4 left to do. So my formula for account name is pretty simple. Again, prefixes on everything. So my account name, literally, I'm just doing test account number and then whatever that account counter is. So we're actually going to start by creating test account number 5. And then we'll go through and we're going to do this 4 more times. We're going to do test account 4, test account 3, 2, and 1. So then I have a second assignment in here because as I create each one of these variables, I want to be able to create those in bulk. I don't want to have to call the database 5 times every time I create an account and say, okay, save this one. Great, now save the next one, and so on and so forth. So instead, what I do is I add them to a new collection. And so this gets prefixed with a CVAR. And this is what tells me that I'm expecting there to be more than one thing in this particular variable. Could be 2, could be 20, could be 100, and it might only be 1. But because it could hold more, I label it appropriately. And so what I do is I take my single record variable for our new account and I add it to this collection so that after we get to the end of our loop where our counter does equal 0, all in one fell swoop, I'm going to come over here to my create records and I'm just going to take that entire collection of 5 and create all 5 of them at once. So I always thought that was pretty cool. So next thing, we have a fault path. So we're going to have a whole session on error handling later, but essentially there's always the possibility, that something goes wrong when you try and save records or create records, right? That's why we have validation rules. Our users always like to come to us and they're like, I think I broke Salesforce. There's this scary red error message and I don't know what to do, right? Anybody had that? So we want to make sure if we run into that for our users that they are made aware and that they have a way to deal with it. So I actually am going to have an assignment here that sets a specific error message, and then I have built a subflow in to handle that error. It's going to basically send a message to me as the admin going, hey, user tried to do something, it didn't quite work right, here's what went wrong. But then my user also is going to get a screen that tells them, hey, something went wrong. And then ask them to reach out to the administrator. And we can also put in this error message variable that we created. So whatever actually went wrong, they can give us as the administrator enough information for us to go kind of dig in, figure out what happened and how we can fix it to help them accomplish what they needed to. So, but we're going to assume happy path here, and that did work in our flow today. So we're going to create the records. And then as soon as we create them, what I do is I go and I get them. So generally, you're going to want to go and get those records that you just created so that you have everything available to it that's part of that record. Now, for our purposes today, all I really did was created the account name. So I probably could have leveraged the same collection variable that I already had for those, flow veterans on the call. But for those of you who are new, it's kind of good practice. Once that I've created those records, we're going to go and we're going to get them and retrieve all of that information so that we can use it. So, and this actually is exactly what our problem is because this is my teaching flow. We're missing some pieces here. So I have this beautiful loop up here that's going through and creating all of our opportunities. And I'm missing a couple of boxes here on this particular loop. So let's dig in and create those. So once we get our new accounts, what we're going to do is we actually now need to loop through those. So this is our first actual loop that we're going to use. So I'm going to add a loop in here called new account loop, go through each new account and create ops for it. So the collection variable I'm going to use is I'm actually going to go and use the accounts from my get new accounts. So this is going to attach that to the get records that I had here, as opposed to using the collection variable that I was leveraging over here in my assignment to create all those new accounts that just had the basic information in it. So I'm going to connect my get records here to our loop. And then each time we go through the loop, we need to do the same thing. We have another variable, our opportunity counter, same thing that we had as our account counter. It's taking that second input field on that screen of how many opportunities to create for each account. And we're going to go through that. So we're going to go here and connect our loop. So for every new account that we created, we're going to go through and we're going to do this. Okay, so now kind of the cool thing that we can do is if you have something that's pretty close to right in your flow, instead of having to rebuild the entire thing from scratch, we can come up here and use our handy dandy little copy paste button. So I'm just going to hit copy. It's going to grab me a copy of that entire element, and I can come down here and then just make some edits. So you'll notice that to make sure the API names are different, it adds an _0. So basically that's going to be how you keep those two things separate. So now we're going to build test op and update the counter. So we'll just update that. So, and now we're going to build our individual test op records, and we're also going to decrement that counter by 1. Okay, so we're going to have to go in here, and I do have a variable for my new opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and leverage this. And so we need to give it a name. So I'm going to grab that name field. And so then we're also going to use another formula. Hopefully I have it in here. Okay, and so I don't have this already built, so we can go ahead and build this on the fly as a new resource. So we'll go build a formula. Again, we'll prefix that with FML or FMLA, whatever makes sense for you. When it comes to naming conventions, I'm all about making sure that you're consistent within your company and making sure that they're used more than you need to do this a certain way that is across the board or across the world. As long as you and your team are on the same page and it works and everybody's using it, I consider that a success. So we're just going to call this formula for op name. For time purposes, I'm going to skip the description. Please always fill out your description fields. It helps the people coming after you to know exactly what's going on. So I'm going to just do this again. We're going to call this test opportunity number. Put that in our quotes. And then we're also going to use that counter. So I know I have a counter in here. So I'm going to scroll down to find my opportunity counter, and we're going to use that. And then I'm also going to add what account this is for. So I'm also going to add in here our account name. So to do that, I'm going to go and I'm going to find our record variable, which is our current item from our loop. So that's what this is. So from our new account loop, the current item that we're working with, so in this case, probably test account number 1, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab that record, and then I'm going to find the name field on that account. And we're going to add that in here. So, and while I'm thinking about it, I'd like to add a little bit of a space dash and space for formatting so it looks pretty. So we're going to have test opportunity number 1, space dash space, test account number 1, for example. So we'll go ahead and click done there. Cool. Yay for all of the errors. So we'll see whether or not this is going to let us do it, but we'll keep going and see exactly what happens with that. So since we're working with opportunities, there are a few other fields that are going to be required, and there's a few other fields that we're going to want in our test data anyway. So I'm going to come back to my new opportunity, and I'm going to need to associate this to an account. So we're going to put that in here. Again, we're going to go to our loop, and we're going to grab that, and we're going to pull the account ID. So because this is an account record that we're working with, this is just the straight ID field here. We're going to need to put a stage to our opportunity. So we'll go in here and we'll go to opportunity and we'll find the stage field. And I'm just going to set all of these to that initial prospecting value. And I'm okay doing that in my sandbox here with my test data. All right, so the other thing that I want to make sure that we put in here is we're going to need a close date. So I can do a formula for that and we can see if we have any. So I actually have a formula for our opportunity close date. So that's generally just going to be today, probably plus about 30 is generally a good rule. And then finally, I want to do an amount field. So we have test data. It usually is a good idea to make sure that we have an amount on our opportunity. So I also have a formula in here for our opportunity amount, and we'll put that in here as well. Now, you could do some interesting things if you wanted to change these, make some of them with different amounts, different close dates. We're not going to get that fancy with this. And again, there's probably several other tools that are out there if you want to build data with that level of complexity. Or of course, there's tools that help you seed sandboxes with different data that you can also purchase from some great Salesforce partners. So cool. We're just going to go through all of the things that are wrong today on this particular flow. Let's see if I can do a save as on it. All right, well, if at first Salesforce says we don't want to work with you, we'll click all the error messages, and then we're going to go cheat, and we're going to get my answer flow. So all right, so if we take a look at this one, you'll notice that now we have that. So for our loop here that we created, we're going to go through that decision counter. We'll do the assignment again. So same thing that we were doing. Our new opportunity gets set with a name, an account, an amount, a close date, and a stage. I can also take my opportunity amount here, and every time I do it, I add 10,000. So as I continue creating opportunities, this amount field is going to increase. My opportunity close date was originally set, and it's going to be 7 days into the future for everyone after that. And finally, with our opportunity counter, we'll subtract that each time until we get down to 0. Okay, so the one thing that's really key here on this particular iteration is we're looping through an account, and then we need to create 5 opportunities for that account. So as we do that, we take our counter down from 5 to 0. Well, when we're done with that, we actually need to reset that before we go on to our next account. Otherwise, if the counter stays at 0 when we go to account number 2, it's going to hit this decision going, hey, is your opportunity count 0? And it's going to say, yep, sure is. And it's going to go, okay, I'll skip all that then. And so after you do your first test account, it won't actually create anything for your subsequent accounts. So it's very important that we remember at this point to reset that opportunity counter before we go back through our loop for the next subsequent accounts to create all those. And so again, once we do all of that, we're going to create those in bulk. So we have another collection variable. And again, if I'm creating records or updating records, I give it the really descriptive name of objects to create or objects to update, because that just absolutely screams to me on the canvas, hey, this is the stuff that I'm updating or that I'm creating. And so there's no real question about whether or not that's what we're doing. So, all right, after we do this, again, because we're trying to create records, there's always that possibility that something would go wrong. So again, we have a fault path here to handle that, and we can pass a different error message to our user if needed. So for example, this error message I can actually set to opportunities were not successfully created, as opposed to this one up here where it says accounts were not successfully created. So I can actually set that error message based on where we are in the flow to be able to help our users understand how far did we get, where did we run into an issue, and when they come to the administrator with that, they have some better information than, hey, the flow broke and I don't really know what happened. So, all right, so we've got all this in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hop back over to our accounts, and I'm going to do some quick deletes here just to get rid of all of these. So we can run this puppy again from scratch, and it will work the way we want, and it'll be painfully obvious that we have nifty new test accounts in our org. And this time, we'll have the opportunities to go with it. So here's the other thing to know. When you're working with record-triggered flows, which we've talked about in a couple of weeks past, anytime you debug them, it's happening in a context of like practice. It's not actually happening in your org. Everything gets rolled back when you're done. There's no changes that are actually happening in your database. When you're working with the other types of flows, so auto-launched flows, screen flows, for example, when you debug these, it's actually committing all of this information to the database unless you come and use this element down here called rollback records. So as we go through here, you know, as we've talked, the pink elements, the data elements on the canvas is when the interaction with the database is actually happening. It's when things become real. So we have several of those pink elements here on the canvas, which means we're going to actually create those account records, and we're going to actually create those opportunity records, and you'll be able to see them even after a debug run, because I don't have this rollback records in my flow. So if you wanted to, you could create a version of this for debugging and testing that has that rollback. So if you wanted to test whether or not you could mass delete things, for example, Probably don't want to do that for realsies when you're just testing. So you can always put in this rollback records, and it gives you the option to say, all right, whatever I did, just test it, don't actually do it, or technically in this case, it's do it, but then undo it real quick, is what that rollback records is going to do. So, all right, we're going to do our debug here. So, and again, one more time, what we're going to do is I don't have any input variables. I want to run this as me. So I'm just going to go ahead to the first screen here. So welcome to our new sandbox. Let's click next. And so we were going to do 5 and 5, but maybe this time let's do 6 and 3. So I'll have 6 accounts, 3 each. So 6 times 4 is 24. We're expecting 24 new records in our org. So we'll run through everything. I love the debug log because it actually lets you see what's happening at every particular point in your flow. So you can see that we went to that screen. The second screen with the inputs, we can actually see that there was my input of 6 and 3 for those 2 fields on there. And then you can actually see the outcomes that happen on each one. So we checked, is my counter 0? Nope, it's 6, that's greater than 0. Okay, we'll take that outcome. We go through and we create the first account, and then we actually decrement that counter by 1, so now the counter equals 5. So we continue to go through here and see this, and so as we continue to scroll down, you'll actually be able to see building that test opportunity. And when we get all the way down to the bottom here, we'll actually be able to see that it's creating all of these different opportunities. So now let's just hop back over real quick and do a quick refresh on our accounts page. We'll go look at all of those. So we can see this time we do have our 6 accounts. And so if I hop into one of those particular test accounts, now we can actually see that we do have those opportunities in here. So test opportunity number 1, number 2, and number 3. So, all right, at this point, I'll open it up for questions about this process or anything I did with this particular one. And then if you'd like, we can hop into another screen flow that I built. So, but I'll take a breath, take a beat, and see if anybody has any questions. All righty. So one of the great uses for screen flows, in my opinion, is to be able to walk your users through a process, which is what we just did here. So there's actually another one that I have built that is both an account and contact quick create wizard. And so in this case, the requirement is that our users came to us and basically said, hey, we're having a problem. It's way too complicated to put in a new account and a new contact. There's all these fields that I need. It's too many screens. I have to flip different places. Like, can't you just make this easier? And so we can say, yeah, sure, absolutely, we can do that. And so what this is going to do is this is going to be a quick create wizard for both an account and contact. And you're going to notice that there's a lot of decisions in here that we've done kind of a different version of error handling. So again, on our screen here, we can do a couple of different things. We can put some headers in here so that we can see what the account information is going to be. We can make some fields required. For example, we have the input for the account name is going to be required. There are some different types of components that you have access to over here in the toolbox for your screens. Some of them are pretty simple and straightforward, like this text input box for account name. But then there's some that have some additional functionality built in, like this address. So an address, we know in the US has multiple parts, it does in most places in the world, but this is definitely formatted for more of kind of the North American US and Canada version of addresses. So being able to pull this in and have separate pieces for the street, city, zip, state, and country, but it's all part of one component that you can add instead of having to add 5 text boxes. And so then what it does over here is it gives you actually each one of these is going to have its own value that you can see over here. So postal code value, the state and province value, the street value. And so you're going to access these a little bit different. It looks almost like a mini record variable, the way those look when you go in and select fields when you want to use them later in your flow. So same thing with things like the URL. So you can actually give them some information that you want here, and it's going to require some additional input parameters when you're building this. So for example, here on the email, it gives you the ability to actually put in placeholder text so that you can show your users what you want this to look like. So they put it in the appropriate format. So those are some of the cooler components that you've got access to. And definitely there's some others here that are brand new, like choice lookup, for example. So absolutely, this is a great time to hop into your sandbox and kind of play around with those. All right, so now that we go through and we have all of this information on one screen, so instead of the traditional way of creating both an account and a contact, you can have them input the account information and the contact information in one screen. Now, as we talked about before, validation can be kind of tricky. And so you can set certain fields to be required, and that'll absolutely help with your validation and flows. But there are some things that don't give you that sort of option. And so then what do you do about making sure that you have everything you need so you don't run into those errors and to help guide your users to a better user experience? Well, and the way we've chosen to do it in this flow is to do a series of decisions. So I have a decision here called "Are required fields completed?" And so what we can do then is we can actually go in and set decision outcomes based on different conditions. And so what I did is each thing that I wanted to make required, so I want to have an address when all the parts of that address need to be completed. So I need a street, a city, a state, a zip, and a country. And I also need their first and last name to be able to create the contact. So I can go through and actually create all of these by saying, is the input address for city value an empty string? Basically, there's nothing there, it's blank. And by doing this, what I can then do is come through these decision outcomes, and let me zoom back in, there's out. And then if any of these are hit, I'm gonna set a specific error message. So what I'm gonna do is the entry error input is going to be contact last name in this case, so or contact first name and so on. So then we can actually push them to an entry error screen that basically says we have a variable for an entry error message that is going to leverage that. And so as I mentioned, we're in freeform earlier. Now that we're in the auto layout, it's over here. So if I come down and I look at my variable for my error message, oh, it's a formula. That's why I can't find it. So it's going to take whatever that assignment was. So contact last name, for example, is a required field. Please click next to return to the input screen and fill out this field to continue. I've also forced them to go through the next screen as opposed to using the previous screen, which you can certainly allow them to do. There have been in the past some challenges with hitting previous and whether or not the screens would retain the entries that a user put in before. Salesforce has done a lot of great work on that. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm kicking them back to that first initial screen. So this connects back up to here and asks them to refill it out or fill out whatever they were missing based on that error message. And so then as we go through over here, we'll zoom in just a little bit again, because we're creating that account and that contact. Again, we pull in some fault paths to make sure that if something were to go wrong, maybe there's a new field that we added that I forgot about, so it's not in my flow that's now required. And if that's the case, I want to be able to handle that error and give a nicer message to our users. And of course, when we're done, then we'll give them that success screen, and it'll actually give them the ability to click right into either the account or the contact. And so this is actually kind of cool because we can do this as a link if we want, and there's a couple of cool tricks that you can do in screen flows with that as well. So always something that I like being able to do is give them the ability to be hyperlinked right there and go, hey, you just created an account, like click here. You don't actually have to go search for it or anything. It's a direct link. So, and the way we do that is if we put in that input first name and last name that we have here, you'll notice that my link is actually highlighted blue, showing me that there is a link. And so what I've been able to do is actually put that in the link title, and then there's a URL, which I'm not able to show you unfortunately, once I create it. But there is a formula that you can build a link to a record in Salesforce. So if we go in and look at this account link, for example, this is a great formula. Eric Smith, one of my MVP friends, actually shared this in a wonderful article that the admins blog came out with on useful formulas. And so this is how you parse out the left part of any Salesforce URL. If you ask me how this works, the answer is it's magic. No, I'm kidding. I don't actually know how to parse this terribly well, but it's something to do with that partner server URL and what's in it. And you find the services part, and everything that's before that is what you want. But this is a great way to make dynamic record links. So you're building this in a sandbox, and you need to use the sandbox URL. So in this case, it's my dev org through Trailhead, my playground. It's the resourceful Impala VZ08TS-dev-ed. Well, that's awesome. But once I move this to a production org, that URL is going to change. Or if I package this up and put this in a different org, again, that URL is going to change. So instead of having to hard code it and then change it in every flow before I actually activate it in my new org, I can use this dynamic URL, and then because I have this create account link on the back, this create account actually pulls my record ID, and you put those two things together and it gives you a dynamic link. So let's take this one out for a spin. Let's go see again what kind of accounts we have. All right, so there is no Acme account, but we are going to go and we are going to create the Acme account with our debug. Once I get to the right screen here. All right, so debugging this, we're going to create both our account and our contacts. So I'm going to call this Acme Inc. We'll put them at 123 Main Street, Anytown, US. Acme.com, and we will have Mr. Roadrunner. So this is interesting because I just threw in the www and I ignored the HTTP. So it is going to give me a warning message. So if I go back and I put in my http:// and spell it correctly, then that will take care of it. So we can do Roadrunner at acmeinc.com. All right. So I also, again, skipped the country. So you can see that error message gave me what I missed for that being a required field. So I can put this in as USA. And now if I click on this link very specifically, it'll actually take me to my brand new Acme Inc. account. And we can see that I have my Roadrunner contact here as well. So yes, Kristen, this is definitely built more for training purposes. I'm seeing some questions come in. More for training purposes than how I would build this in the real world. If they had left more than one field blank, I'm hoping that they would go back and fix them all. But really what we should do is we should kind of gather all of those errors together and display all of them at the same time and say, hey, you missed these 3 fields, so please go fill out last name, account, and website. And let them fix all those at once. Otherwise, to your point, they would go through that decision tree, and if they fix them one at a time, they'd continue to hit errors over and over again, one at a time, until they got through all of them. So yes, definitely this is more for training than real world build scenario. And then Jennifer says, will duplicate rules kick in on screen if someone inputs identical info or later on when creating a new record? If you have your duplicate rules set up, they will trigger when trying to create things through Flow. And that's one of those things where you need to make sure you're handling a lot of that duplicate checking inside of your Flow, or they're going to hit the duplicate rules and they're going to get those ugly Flow error messages that are basically like an unhandled Flow exception has occurred, and it's all that gobbledygook that terrifies users. So you definitely want to make sure that if you have duplicate rules, that you're taking that into account when building flows or giving your users the ability to kind of check that. Again, Eric Smith, who is a huge contributor to the unofficial SF community, unofficialsf.com has a great kind of validation checker that you can pull in here that will, I think, not only verify that you're not going to run afoul of any validation rules, but also duplicate rules and matching rules. So it's a really cool thing that you can add into your flow to make it much more robust and much better for real world use cases than what we have today. Julia asked, was that a rich text header for accountant contacts? So yeah, if we hop back in here, we'll go into the actual flow and back to the screen. So your display text input over here actually gives you the ability to have a rich text box over here that you can set your font and your font size and your colors and your formatting and all that great stuff. So I'm a huge fan of using that. You can also display images or even GIFs. In one org I used to work in, we had users submitting requests through a screen flow, and at the very end, we had a GIF of the kitty hitting the nuclear button before they submitted it. And we're like, all right, well, last chance, are you sure you want to do this? And if the kitty hit the button, they're like, yep, we're submitting the ticket to you. So just a great way to throw a little bit of fun and interest into your org and your flows when you've got time to do it, if that's, of course, professionally appropriate, or build them for fun in your dev org, right? Oh, I love it. Lena's like, I use GIFs on all my confirmation screens, right? Why would you not put GIFs in your confirmation screens? Like, they've done things right. Let's celebrate that. So absolutely, I am all about that. So, all right, the one last thing I wanted to show on screen flows today, we're actually going to hop over into a different dev org, and we're going to take a look at this flow here. I actually wanted to make sure that we talk about how you can put flows on your community pages, your experience site pages. So let's see if I can find this in here. Okay, so this is the dev org that I built my portfolio site off of. So if we open up my portfolio site, and this is a great Trailhead project. If you haven't done this, especially if you're newer to the ecosystem, it'll walk you through how to build a portfolio Experience Cloud site to be able to showcase your skills and your journey. And I think that's a great idea. So I went ahead and did that portfolio project on Trailhead. There's actually a link to it here on my portfolio site. But one of the things I really wanted to showcase was I'm a Flownatic. I love my flows, so why not throw a flow onto my portfolio screen? And so this guest book that I have here is actually powered by Salesforce Flow. And so I put that in here just for fun to let people know who were dropping by. But essentially what we did is we were able to build this flow, and as long as you set the permissions appropriately, you've got to make sure that you're opening up guest user profile access to flows, because Salesforce does try in the name of security to lock a bunch of things down. But assuming that you've given that guest Experience Cloud user profile access to your flows, they are able to interact with those even if they're not logged in or authenticated to your Experience site. So again, just that initial screen, that display text up here that's rich text that says, hey, thanks for dropping by. And then we can give them the fields that we want them to fill out. So first name, last name, reason for visit. Again, Sarah showed this last time. You can use a pick list on an existing object to populate here instead of having to rebuild it from scratch in your flow. And then I want an email address and then some comments. And then I also put in a checkbox, don't show my entry in public site visitors. So what we actually did with this is as people are filling this out, then what's happening is this is actually creating a custom object record called site visitor with everything that they put in on that page. So what's their reason for visiting, their first, last name, and email address, any comments they put in. I actually will include whether or not there was a comment. There's a do not share publicly. And so that way I can actually go back to my portfolio site. And as people have filled out my guest book, we can go and we can actually see a list of everyone who has said, yeah, I'm going to sign your guest book, and you're allowed to tell people publicly that I did. So if we actually look through and all these numbers here, we're missing 17, for example. So visitor number 17 clicked the box that said, please don't show my name publicly. Okay, that's cool. It's probably in my org. So for privacy reasons, I won't actually pull that up and show you because they asked to remain private. But I can actually show everybody who came and visited my portfolio site. And it was a fun way to both be able to learn for me personally how you can display information from your Salesforce org on a public site, and also the way to use flows on your community sites as well. So of course you can do all the same things and even more with authenticated users. So if they actually did sign in and have a community, or a community plus license, we could do even more with what they have access to, but I wanted to make this available publicly for anybody who was able to stop by. But it's just kind of a cool thing to look at and know that not only can you use screen flows internally, but you can also use screen flows externally and put those on a site page where even unauthenticated people, just the general public, can stop by and interact with your flows and actually add or update information in your Salesforce database. So it's also cool, and it's also a huge word of caution. So as you're working with experienced sites, always make sure that you're keeping security topmost in your mind and that you know what is exposed or accessible to that guest user profile. So, all right, I know we've got just a few minutes left. So again, I'll open the floor for questions if anybody has any. Going once. Fantastic. All right, well, we'll wrap just a wee bit early today, but thank you again, everyone, for joining. Please join us again next week. Marshall King is going to be with us to talk about schedule triggered flows. So we're going to move on to the next type of flows that we have as we continue our flow learning journey. But we hope you enjoyed this automation hour, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you much.